All right, thanks. Good morning, everybody. Afternoon. I'm an alcoholic. My name's Craig. And Glenn, thanks again for the invite. Always, always enjoy the opportunity to share my experience, strength, and hope, and give some purpose to my self-centered mind here. Sobriety date is November 28th, 1998. I have a sponsor. I have a service sponsor. I have the opportunity to sponsor and service sponsor, and my home group is the Mighty Purpose and Rhythm Group. We meet at Thursdays. It's an online only group. We meet Thursdays at 9 p.m. Eastern time. So if you would like to attend that meeting at any point, you're welcome to join us. I enjoy the format. It's usually a 15-minute lead on a piece of A literature, followed by a 15-minute Q&A, followed by a secretary's report, and then we open up the group for discussion and sharing on the topic or the problem as it relates to alcoholism or the solution as it relates to alcoholism. As far as what I'm doing here, I grew up in a family of alcoholism long before I even knew what alcoholism meant. I mean, we can go back in a timeline long before I was even thought of alcoholism was running rampant through my family. But I remember early days, being at these gatherings, these parties, and I'm 5 years old, and I'm finishing off the beer bottles, taking the Jello shots, whatever I can get my hands on, just thinking I'm cool and mischievous. And that's interesting because when I was new in Alcoholics Anonymous and I would share my story, I used to tell everyone I started drinking at 16, which was not true. I started drinking long before that. But yeah, so I was stealing Jello shots and doing this stuff, and I was a big troublemaker. It kind of went parallel to my alcoholism, but obviously got worse as I got more engaged in the addiction to alcohol. But alcohol didn't really do anything to me in those younger days when I was, taking sips and stuff, or at least I didn't recognize it as such. Probably again when I was in, around 9 or 10, I would sneak off a couple times with my cousins because everything around me, my aunt would be driving me while she was drunk. My uncle would be ripping sinks out of the wall because he was drunk. People would be getting incarcerated because they were drunk. Fights in the family were happening because they were drunk. Like there was alcohol all around me, but I didn't really do the math. It was normal, And there was always parties, and my mom worked three jobs, and we didn't have much, and sometimes the people I was with were less than admirable. But again, all in relation to alcoholism, because in my experience, alcoholism breeds alcoholism. But probably at about 11 years old, alcohol did something to me, right? And I think I probably would have eventually killed myself. I really think that when I was young, like I didn't need alcohol to have friends or be popular or talk to the women or anything. Like I was doing okay there, but I still had this huge hole in the soul. I was still either the worst person in the room or the best, and it just fluctuated depending on what erratic emotional state I was in for that day or that moment. But I literally lived my life thinking about how I either wanted to die, I couldn't take this existence anymore, or I wanted to kill you because you were in my way. And I was very angry, very suicidal, homicidal. And this is what I'm feeling at 10 or 11 years old. And a lot of that's a byproduct of where I grew up and the alcoholism in the family and stuff. But again, alcohol didn't really do anything yet. But then came that time where I was around 11 and I ingested alcohol, and I just felt like, what Bill talks about, I had arrived. I just felt like something had changed. I felt a little bit relief. And I do believe to this day that alcohol saved my life. Now, quickly after it saved my life and gave me what I thought, erratic or not, some sort of purpose, it also brought me down very quick. I came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous when I was 19. And by that point, I was already in 18 or 19 institutions, incarcerated, juvenile detention centers, multiple therapists, outpatient programs, kicked out of high schools. I mean, like you name it. And so I felt like I was saved, but then I also felt like it was a short ride to a dark, dark place. Here's what makes me alcoholic, though. I could tell you stories of carrying weapons and engaging in illegal activities and stealing cars and all of this things that I ended up doing because of what I was involved in. But that's not what made me alcoholic. What made me alcoholic was the three parts of the illness that we learn as we go through the book: the mental obsession, the physical craving, and the spiritual malady. I clearly had the spiritual malady long before I even got into the position of crossing that imaginary line. Like I explained the hole in the soul pretty clearly, or at least I feel I did. And the mental obsession, um, like all I did was think about alcohol. Everything revolved around alcohol. When I had it in me, when I didn't have it in me, when I was waking up, when I was going to bed. All of my decisions were made based on when I was going to get it, how I was going to do it, how I was going to use it. And I came in Alcoholics Anonymous, never had a legal drink, so it wasn't as easy. It was still fairly easy for most kids underage because of where I was and what I had access to, but it still wasn't like I could just walk to the pantry and grab it. Like there was some extra work involved, some extra stashing, and of course hiding it while at school, and et cetera, et cetera. Just rewinding again, I'm bouncing back and forth. My grandfather had died from alcoholism before I even met him. I had another grandfather that died about 16. My grandmother, she was yellow when she died, and we didn't call it alcoholism. We called it diabetes. We didn't call it cirrhosis of the liver. We called it diabetes because we didn't want to talk about it. And mostly the men were the ones that were really heavily engaged in the turmoil of the active drinking and the issues, and it was the women that were engaged in the neuroses part of the alcoholism. But there was still, much like my grandmother, there was still women that were heavy hitters, and my aunt with regards to alcoholism. But looking back at my life, even before my four-step, it just seemed like everyone that was connected to my family in some way was either alcoholic or dealing with some sort of repercussions from alcoholism. So alcohol did something to me. I felt like it kind of saved my life, and then I was off to the races. And I was very good in athletics, and I was a decent artist, and yada yada. And I was making my way through being a kid that moved around a lot, and we didn't have much, and I was doing okay. But then all of a sudden, that stuff fell very quickly because what did I need to do? I needed to drink. We talk in Alcoholics Anonymous a lot about it's a program who need it or someone who wants it, and I'm just in awe of God's power. I needed it and wanted it, and I still couldn't stop. And it's almost like you're possessed. If you're alcoholic like me, you understand. It's almost like you're possessed. I wanted at times so badly to stop, to never touch alcohol again, to be a different person. I didn't want to be like my father. I didn't want to be like these people I saw. I wanted it so bad. I could taste it. I mean, I was sweating and crying that I wanted to change so bad. And in the very next thought, I'm like, yeah, but let me just have one. After I have this one, then we can go down to business and start to change. Then we can start to look at, the reality. And I was powerless over alcohol. I was powerless over it with respects to those in my family that drank it and how they behaved and what they did and whether or not they would stop. And I was powerless myself. And my father, he was an alcoholic too, and he wasn't around. And, he was a New York City fireman, and, he got all the publicity in the world for saving lives all the time and this and that. But so many times he left me on the stoop just wondering if he was going to come. Nobody wanted to tell me because I was 8, 9, 10, 11, whatever, that I was stupid. But the truth is, you would have thought after the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th time, why would I still sit on the stoop and actually think he was going to show up? Because he never did. It was all part of the same thing. I actually won a writing. I won 2 writing contests. I won one writing contest where I got to meet the first ever borough president in New York City, who was a female. I got to meet her, got to go to Washington, D.C., all of this. I got to meet Mayor Ed Koch at the time. And, that was like, cool. But then I won another writing contest where I talked about the wonderful summer I had with my father. And the interesting thing is I didn't see my father that whole summer. It was all made up, and this is kind of like what I did as a child. I was very good at making stories up to survive and to get by. I mean, it's literally what I had to do to either cover my alcoholism or to deal with what I had and what I was going through. Yeah, so the drinking progressed. I mean, the truth is, if you look through the short but potent amount of time that I was drinking, I mean, it was often a blackout, a gray out, a pass out, some sort of intervention like getting punched or punching someone else or getting arrested or falling asleep on a rooftop. I mean, there was often daily activities as such that got me to the next day. You know, you drank until you passed out. When you woke up, you drank some more. And, you know, it's just, I can remember so many times, like, there's nothing I hate more than being nauseous and having the spinnies. I even hate today when I'm sick. I just can't stand it. And I would pray to God over and over to make this go away, make this go away. And as soon as I threw up that last time, I just went right back to drinking. And you know, I told myself I would never do it again. And a few minutes later, I was doing it. Alcoholism is a really interesting thing for me because it talks to me in my own voice, and I didn't really know that prior to coming to AA and working the steps and learning all these things we learned. But I can reflect and look back, and even in this moment, as I'm telling you my story, there was so many times that my head just convinced me of things that were not real, just so I can drink again, justifying that behavior, rationalizing. And I really identify with the book where it talks about self-knowledge avails us nothing because, you know, even as I got older as a teenager, everything I had seen in my family, all the institutions I had been to, all the treatment classes, even some AA meetings, it didn't matter what I knew. I still didn't have the power to stop, and I could not stop on my own. Um, so I definitely identify with the hole in the soul, the one part of the illness, and the spiritual malady, either being the best or the worst, or just feeling empty and scared and anxious and depressed all the time. And I can remember being in one of my first institutions. You know, I had delirium tremens at like 17 years old, and then I had panic attacks for like 3 months after that. It was like, it was terrifying. And that whole time I was in that institution, I was telling myself, I'm not going to drink when I get out. I don't want to live like this. I'm not going to drink when I get out. And then, of course, what did I do? I just went right back to drinking. And I identify with that mental obsession. You know, we talk sometimes in AA and we say that you know, I chose not to drink today, or and I'm a guy, you can call me someone who gets into semantics, but you know, I just lost the power to choose a long time ago. And although if you were to offer me a beer, I would say no. I'm just not the person that wants to say I chose not to drink today. I think what's more important for me to understand is I choose to pick up the kit of spiritual tools. I choose to call my sponsor. I choose to call a sponsee. I choose to show up and share my experience today. I choose to go to the home group and engage in the business meeting or to be of service. Like those are the things I have the power. I don't want to even subtly think for a minute that I have any power over alcohol because it's just not good for me. That's my conception and understanding. But I do know that it's the first drink that gets us to where we go, but it's the mental insanity that brings us to the first drink. That's the illness, right? How many times have we been sober for a short amount of time? How many times in my story did I get out of a treatment center or get out of jail or go to another school and I'm not actively drinking, but it was my mind. It was the mental obsession, the delusion, the erratic thinking that always brought me back to the drink. So I really identify with alcoholism as a mental illness, and I know that I'm defective in that sense. Um, and then the physical craving. My grandmother, the one I shared with you, who was yellow, she was in the hospital dying. I was about 16 or whatever. My mother said, you know, grab the car, throw the hazards on, and come to the hospital, come see your grandmother. And of course, I wanted to see my grandmother, but I needed to drink first because that's what you do before you do everything you drink. And I drank, and the craving kicked in, and all bets were off for a while, and I didn't make it there for the passing. And you know, I used to think I was such a bad person, but I realized like that's what we're talking about here. This is the illness. That is every day long. I would write down, go see my grandmother before I drink. Of course, I want to see my grandmother before I drink, but I just didn't have the power to do so. I grew up rescuing animals like in the streets of Jersey City and feeding the homeless. And so many times I would ask my mother to help, and we barely had food to begin with, but I wanted to make peanut butters and jellies to bring them, you know, to the homeless folks. And I was such a good kid with a good heart. And it's not that I was a bad kid, but I then lost access to that because I was engaged in the hustle of alcohol and alcoholism because that was all that mattered. Relationships didn't matter, girlfriends, sports, my mom, you know, even my anger at my father for not being there didn't matter. What mattered was drink, drink, drink. When was I gonna have it? Is there enough? Can I stash some more? Can I pretend I
Right.
need some from you, but still have some in the back? Like
Oh, oh,
that's
oh.
thanks. That's what that's what I dealt with as an alcoholic. Um, just a couple other illustrations. I mean, I share this often too. It's very similar to the story with my grandmother. Like when I was young, I was in a gang, and where I was from, like you wore beads, and that was a representation of what gang you were in. And the beads never came off. The only time they would come off is if you go in jail or someone tried to test you and they ripped them off. But every night I would take those beads off and go to the other side of Newark with a kid who I knew, a friend of mine from a rival gang, so I can drink. So the moral of the story is there's no loyalty. There was only alcohol. Like that's what mattered to me. Nothing mattered more than alcohol, and I needed it often. Um, so these are some of my short stories about my drinking, my mental obsession, my physical craving, the spiritual malady, what my family was like, what it was like growing up, and what my thinking was, and how I acted with or without the drink. And again, I'm broke without the drink too. If I don't have this solution, and here's one I say all the time, like like what's crazier, you know, drinking or being an Alcoholics Anonymous and not working the steps? It's just something to kind of reflect on. Like if you're alcoholic like me, what's crazier, drinking or being in Alcoholics Anonymous and not working the steps? And they're really very similar to me. They both have the same result to me. I don't know what you need to do or what Joe or Eddie or Beverly or Barbara needs to do. I just know for me, I need these steps on a regular basis. I cannot stop drinking on my own. I am mentally ill. I believe in my innermost self that I'm alcoholic, and I need humility and sincerity, and I now also desire to be a better person, to be involved in a better family, to be useful to not only my A group and the A service structure, but my house and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I came to AA young, and I was in one of my, you know, what did I say, 18, 19 treatment center, and I ended up getting kicked out of that. And my probation officer said, I won't send you to jail, just don't drink and keep going to the meetings and stuff, and I won't violate you. And so I was homeless for a while. You're supposed to have housing, but he let me get away with that. And it's funny because I was homeless in Florida because I had got sent down to Florida, and I always found a way to get a haircut and get a pack of cigarettes. Like we are very creative people. Didn't need food, but needed a haircut and a pack of cigarettes. I mean, my priorities were were right aligned with alcoholism. But the cool thing is, I joined my first home group, which was a young person's group, and it was right next to the tennis center, which is a huge tennis center, right around the corner from a pretty tough neighborhood. And they took me in, and I didn't have a home, but they still let me have a position as a coffee maker. They were very smart. They held all of the stuff. They held the keys, but I was the alternate, which gave me the opportunity to meet up with Mike and some other people every Friday and hear a little bit about Alcoholics Anonymous, and get some things off my chest a little and hear what they're doing and start to see what they're doing. And so a home group was very important for me from day one until now. Like the foundation, if you ask me, well, Craig, why are you 25 years sober? I would tell you, well, it's the 12 steps, of course. It's the home group. It's the service inside the home group. And it's, the rest of the A's principles and practicing them and working them with others. But the home group is where it all begins. I mean, or at least it should be. It's the foundation of everything we learn in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I take it very seriously. Um, so I served many different roles in that home group, coffee maker, and then I was chair, and then I got involved with the young persons committee, and I was on the theme and logo committee, and got involved and met a whole group of new people, and eventually started to I got my first job. There was a kid, Ben, I knew, who was from California. He was down there. He was selling cars, and he was going to get me a job. And I remember the interview like it was yesterday. The guy, first of all, I'm wearing Ben's clothes because I don't really, and Ben's like 6'3", and I know you can't tell on the square here, but I am not 6'3". I'm not even 6 foot. I'm not even 5'11". So I'm five, probably 8, and I probably shrunk an inch since I'm over 40 now. So we'll call it 5'7", right? But anyway, back then I was probably 5'8". So here I am wearing these 6'3" clothes, clearly baggy on me. And I'm not talking baggy like hip hop. I'm talking baggy like these clearly don't fit you. And I'm on the interview with this guy named John, and he says, "So why should I give you the job?" And this is literally what I said to him. I said, "I have no clue, but if I can tell you some of the stories and the way that I did things not too long ago, I sold phone cards that didn't even have minutes on them to people in the streets of Newark, and they bought them from me." I said, "I know how to sell. That's all I can tell you." That was literally what I said to him. And he said, "All right, you're hired." I have no idea why he gave me a job or he trusted I would be professional, but that was the journey to me learning how to, work and be a part of society. But that all came from that young person's group. I had wandered over on a Monday night to a group called Five Time Losers, which was a men's meeting. And I'll never forget, Derek was there sharing his story. He was 8 years sober, and I ran the streets with his son Raheem. And I know where Derek came from, and I know what he did, and I know where he was. And he was such a humble, gentle, thoughtful man, like sharing a story that was so powerful. He was crying a little bit. He was talking about amends. He was doing the things that we all do when we grow up in AA, like we share our experience, strength, and hope with the steps. And but it just floored me, and I knew that I wanted to stay sober, and I knew I was gonna. I just didn't know how, and that right there kind of solidified it, me being a part. And then I met this guy Tommy, and I still didn't know how to listen, guys. If you identify with this, maybe this gives some hope too. Like, I was so broke when I got here. I grew up around alcoholism. I went to like schools where you just left class. They said your name in a loudspeaker once. They didn't care about you. We had roach coaches for lunch. We played basketball games inside cages. Like like I could just give you a sob story after sob story. I did not know how to interact with people, even how to look people in the eye and say hi or say I love you or wow, you look nice today. Like all of those things, I had no clue. I was so broke, and it took me a long time to get anywhere near just simple interactions. Um, Not sure why I went off on that tangent, but I remember Tommy coming out to me after the meeting and saying, "You look so angry, man. Don't you want to talk to somebody?" And the truth was, I wanted to talk to someone every day I was there. I just didn't know how. I was so like, I don't know, like terrified of rejection or something, but I also wanted to punch everybody. It was one of those weird things when you're getting sober, right? But he took the time. And out of that quick inception was me having a sponsor and going through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And, we went through the book, the preface and the forwards with the importance of understanding what A was before we even diagnosed before I diagnosed myself alcoholic, and got to realize how big AA was, how many countries AA was in. It was suggested I read a story in the back of the book. One of the first instructions in the entire book comes long before page one, and it's in the preface, and it asks us to read a story in the back of the book, and it asks us if we identify, do we drink like them, think like them, do we want to, have this recovery like they do? And it was interesting to read that and also attend meetings. And you know, I went through the preface and the forwards, and it was just like I didn't understand everything at the time, but it just meant the world to me that there was an organization that was altruistic and cared, and there was integrity in its message. And I learned really quick that the program is perfect, the people aren't. Really quick. I remember being at the clubhouse, one of my first meetings, and it was a 10 a.m. like Sunday meeting, and I'm looking at the wall. There's the steps, the traditions, the concepts, and you see the word alcohol everywhere. But yet the entire room was talking about heroin. And I was like, why is everybody talking about heroin? I never did heroin. Maybe I don't belong in AA. And I almost walked myself. Here's this kid who you just heard his story. He's clearly alcoholic. He clearly comes from alcoholism. And I almost walked out of Alcoholics Anonymous because everybody was talking about heroin. They weren't talking about alcohol. And that's why the traditions, which maybe we'll get into a little bit later before I wrap up here, is so important in the integrity and the environment we set up to carry the message. Drugs are not a disqualifier in my experience, but alcohol is the qualifier. And there I was, someone brand new who thought I probably shouldn't be there because I never did heroin. I mean, that's clearly not AA's message as I know it so clearly today. But anyways, kept going through the book with him, and I went through those first 43, 44 pages of the book Alcoholics Anonymous. And wow, everything I already shared with you was just amazing to see it in writing. The spiritual malady, the mental obsession, the physical craving, um, just illustrations of it and the way it was written, and just fascinated me. And I came to believe that I was hopeless and futile. And my sponsor gave me a prayer, a first step prayer. God, I'm an alcoholic and I need your help today. And he expressed to me that, if you want to build this relationship with this power greater than yourself, you're not going to have a good relationship by just saying good morning and good night. He was always very cautious to not mock what other people were saying, but he was also, because people say things at meetings, and it was just like, you're alcoholic like me. You're not going to get by just saying, hey, God, in the morning and hey, God at night. Like, you're going to need to talk to God all through the day. And that's what I did all through the day, as much as I could. And it still probably wasn't enough. God, I'm an alcoholic. I need your help today. God, I'm an alcoholic. I need your help today. And that really set up a foundation later on when I got to the 10th step and communicating with God all through the day, and the 11th step with that conscious contact. Because I asked for help before I did everything. Before I got on the bus, before I went to the meeting, before I shared, before I joined my business meeting, before I had a conversation, you name it. Just constantly asking for help and recognizing I'm alcoholic and my life's unmanageable. But those first 43, 44 pages, when you do those chapter by chapter and one-on-one with another alcoholic and share experience, strength, and hope, and solidify those, physical craving, mental obsession, spiritual malady, wow. Like, the bedrock was formed. I was sold on all the ideas from that point. Like, and I knew in my innermost self I was alcoholic. But it also gave me a little knowledge and intelligence to my illness. Dr. Bob for years did all kinds of spiritual things, but he couldn't stay sober because he didn't know his problem. And I felt like I really understood my problem. And that's why sponsorship is so important, one-on-one sponsorship. My experience, like I don't have anything against Big Book Studies or Big Book. It's one of my favorite books, period, not just in AA. I love it. But it's that one-on-one that really solidifies grabbing that personal relationship with God and connecting with another alcoholic and identifying myself. If others disagree, that's fine too. But I don't ever want us to lose that one-on-one with the sponsor. So important for me. Really helped me grasp and understand what it meant to be alcoholic. And the truth is, if I don't have a first step, I don't have the rest. We have this phrase in AA sometimes called two-stepping, right? And it just annoys the crap out of me, that phrase, because there's really no such thing as a two-stepper. Because if you don't have one, you don't have the other 11, and you can't have 12. We tell people, oh, I'm doing the first step and the 12th step. But 12 step is practicing all the principles. You can't two-step. You're zero-stepping, right? So it was so important for me to grab that bedrock and that foundation of the first step, because it was coming to believe in that hopelessness that brought me to the next chapter, We Agnostics, and the relationship with my sponsor, coming to believe in that power greater than myself, and that it could restore me to sanity. And he instilled that in me too. Like, sure, you need to believe, but it's not just about believing in this power. It's about believing that this power can restore you to sanity. And we're going to get there as we approach each of these steps. And there was a prayer for that too. And I asked God for his protection and care as I abandon myself. And please help me let go of old ways and old ideas just for today. And my sponsor promised me permanent sobriety. And he said, you don't have to hold on to the chair and white knuckle it. He goes, you're going to grow emotionally a day at a time, but you can never safely drink again, nor do you ever have to drink again. And that was important for me to understand and hear that. Because, you hear a lot of things in AA. There's a lot of, and listen, you could say the same thing about me. I'm a guy talking right now, and maybe there's some things folks don't agree with, but you hear a lot of individual opinions sometimes versus collective experience. And that's why I really try to be disciplined when working with a sponsee, to share my experience. That's it. We don't need any opinions. You get to make relationships and friendships, and sure, you'll give opinions on what car you like and what particular bread you buy and blah, blah, blah. But with relations to the steps, experience. That's all I have in Alcoholics Anonymous is my experience. But that's a good thing, because that's what makes me equal with you. The minute I have more than that, then I'm better or worse than you. But if I have the experience of alcoholism and the experience of the solution, I'm equal. And my sponsor, when we went through those pages, had me highlight the common problem, which is alcoholism, and the common solution, which the 12 steps, is the cement which binds us. So that's my experience too. When I have that common problem and that common solution, I am connected very well with you guys. Um, Went through that chapter, We Agnostics, and it was so useful for me, and especially pages 46, 47, 48. It tells you the ways that you could seek God, and it also tells you the ways that you could be obstinate away from God. And they're all outlined on those pages. I'm not going to spell them all out. You can look at them yourself if you don't already know them. But there's three tools to start spiritual growth, and then there's tools that will, or not tools, there's variables that will keep us from spiritual growth. And one of the things that always stuck out to me is my sponsor said, you need to honestly ask yourself what spiritual terms mean to you. And it's funny because if I was to tell a room, ask yourself honestly what spiritual terms mean to you, some people might think, what spiritual terms are we talking about? And it's the steps. How can I honestly ask myself what these steps mean if I don't try them? So it was really a nice catapult into that fourth dimension of kind of like nudging me. Let's go through these and ask yourself honestly what they mean to you, you know? And that's what I did. And of course, I never looked back. Got on my hands and knees with the man. I mean, I told you I wasn't holding hands, hugging, or getting on my knees with anybody for anything. And it's not just a man. It's not. I'm not. It's anybody. I didn't want to be around or touch anyone. I mean, I don't even think I hugged my mom from the age like 10 all the way up until a couple years sober. And I got on my hands and knees and we said the third step prayer. Relieve me of the bondage of self. I'll never forget. I didn't know what the heck all those words meant at the time. I really didn't. And my sponsor did say I could write my own prayer, and I said no. So he did give me that option, but I went with that prayer, and I didn't understand most of what it said, but relieve me from the bondage of self. I knew, like, what a prison. Now, I didn't do years and years and years in prison, but I had done some time, both as a juvenile and as an adult, and there is nothing worse than that prison in the mind, being trapped in that mental obsession or that cycle of just, being the victim and the hero in the same story. And it's just, I understand what that meant. And I also knew what we meant by, have victory to bear witness. So if I can change, I can be an example to others. So that third step prayer was powerful to me. And it was explained that this was just a beginning. We have to go do some work. And I got into my fourth step, and I asked God to show me where I was angry, and I wrote down all my resentments and show God what I'm afraid of, and I wrote down all my fears and show God who I hurt sexually, and I wrote down all the people I hurt sexually, and then I started to go through the columns of my resentments, and I was angry at everything. I mean, here's the short version. I was mad at everyone, I was afraid of everything, and I tried to have sex with everyone. That was pretty much the bottom line of my existence. But the resentment inventory in the columns really gave me an opportunity to look at my patterns. It wasn't confession. I looked at these patterns of how I was selfish and dishonest and self-seeking and controlling and frightened over and over. It was so important for me to see that repetition on like 4 legal pads filled with resentments of how every relationship I have with animals, with places, with things, with principles, with individuals, with entities, it's all about me. What am I going to get? How am I going to get it? And I'm angry if you're not doing it the way I think it should be done. It's really that simple, but I needed to see it over and over and over again to be convinced furthermore of my first step, my alcoholism and my life being unmanageable. And same thing with the fear. Because of the places I had been and the things I'd done, I thought I was like a tough guy. And man, I was the opposite of that. I was a terrified little boy who cared so much about what you thought. And I was known as the guy who spoke up. Like literally, that's what I was known as. And I was a performance poet, and I used to, I used to rhyme and like it's like in large crowds, and like I was the guy who spoke up, but it was all not that all of it was pretend, but the sense of like that I didn't care what you thought about me was pretend. I was a great pretender. I really just wanted to know about connection and love, but I didn't know how to access that. And so I was afraid of everything, though. I was afraid of you liking me, not liking me. I was afraid of getting a job, not getting a job. I was afraid of having friends, not having friends. So it was paralyzing. I was afraid of both sides of the fence. So imagine without a solution, why I was stuck still on the razor's edge, you know? And I love the fear prayer, and I use it every time before I speak. You know, it's God, please remove my fear of blank and direct my attention to what you would have me be. So you can fill that in, but with speaking, God, please remove my fear of sounding good and direct my attention to what you would have me be. And I walk with a certain confidence today. I don't need you to tell me I have confidence or not. I know I have confidence, and it's because I know I work these principles. And I know anyone else that does has the same confidence. I know I have something to give. I know I don't need to sound good. I just need to share my experience. And vice versa, if it was a different day and I was sitting and listening, I would get the same confidence and message you have because it's not isolated to me in a good or bad way. And that's what that fear inventory helped me with. Um, and my sexual conduct, I mean, I used women. That's what I did. I didn't know how to do anything else. It was all about me. And we wrote some ideals. And I talk about this all the time. I think it's so important. God is everywhere, including the bedroom. And when I wrote my ideals, I didn't write what I wanted other people to be. We wrote ideals that I wanted in platonic friendships and also in intimate relationships. And you know, I wrote a whole bunch of things that I wanted to be in my friendships and also a whole bunch of things I wanted to be in my intimate relationships. And including in that was the bedroom. And we won't get into the details, but so I put myself in a position though to be other centered, to be helpful, to be open minded, to be honest, to be considerate, compassionate. All of those things I had no idea. I didn't even know what they were. And I started to live up to them, and then other people started to come around me, you know, different people, because I started attracting a different sort of vibe. Um, so I intentionally didn't put a few things down on my fourth step, which was less of a pattern thing and more of a confession that I was afraid to share. And it's funny, I definitely had some things on my fifth step where it was in my best interest to talk to someone ordained or legal. And those things I wasn't a legal advisor. Those things I weren't afraid to share. But the things that I kept that I didn't share with my sponsor in the fifth step were so small now that I think about it. But for whatever reason, it illustrates how big the alcoholic ego was because I did not want to admit with my pride and ego that these things had happened, you know? I went through my fifth step though, and I got a ton out of it. And we looked at patterns. We talked about my fourth, and my sponsor spent 48 hours with me total, not in one clip, but with me on my fifth step. And I'm so grateful that he took that time and spend that time with me because it's really everything that helped me be who I am today. Um, but when I had to go back home and follow those instructions on the bottom of 76 and take the book off the shelf and look at the first 5 proposals and say the prayer, which is, God, please show me if I've omitted anything. I realized I omitted a few things, and I immediately called my sponsor and I shared with him those things that I omitted. And I felt free after that. And then I went into my sixth step, and I'll just tell you a quick story, mixing and matching here. When I was in Jersey, I was probably, I don't know, maybe 10, I don't know, 10 years, 7 to 10 years sober, and I moved to Connecticut and I was at a young person's meeting. It was 1 in the morning, and this kid came up to me and he's like, I've been sitting on this fourth step for a long time and I want to share it with somebody. And I don't trust my sponsor, but you know, I want what you have. And it was because of that time my sponsor spent with me. It was because of those people that showed me service in my home group. It was because of when we had an election for a GSR, there was 5 people standing. There was so much enthusiasm. I had to be at work at 6:30 in the morning and I didn't even flinch. I said, yeah, let's go across the street and sit in my office, which was just my car. It wasn't an office. And I listened to the man's fifth step. And I had to be at work at 6:30, and I didn't sleep that day, but I had all the energy I needed because I would do anything to drink. There was nothing that stood in my way. And I feel like today I'll do anything to help stay sober myself and others. But that was because of people before me that did what they did. The sixth step, it's a very small paragraph, and there was a prayer given to me, and I'm asking God to give me the willingness to walk his will and purpose. But there was some action for me to go back through my fourth step and list all of my defects of character and ask God to remove them. And it's something I thought was important to spend all that time, even though it was tedious to go back through those hundreds and hundreds of names, but to look at each individual thing and identify each of those defects and to ask God to help me be willing to let go of these. Because even after all that work I had done, there was still lust, there was still greed, still wanted to be in charge, still wanted to hold on to the identity of anger because I thought it was easier and safer. And so lots of work had to be done. But after I had done all that work, I felt confident to do the 7-step prayer, which essentially to me, if I had cliff notes to the 7-step prayer, it's just preparing me to write an 8-step list and give me the strength to make amends. That's what all that means to me. But the one thing that really stuck out to me after all that work I had done, where it says we give good and bad to him, because I didn't need to be, yes, I need to know what right and wrong is, but the words just made sense to me at the time. I didn't need to be in charge of all of these good things and bad things and right and wrong. I just gave all of me to my higher power, to another human being, and I didn't need to worry about any limitations anymore. The rest of my life was going to be lived in a moment to moment yet spontaneous way, where I was just going to do what was in front of me. Didn't matter how much money, how many cars, women, blah, none of it was moving forward on this spiritual journey. And my purpose was very simple. And inside that purpose, I would find other solutions. All of these things I was experiencing when I gave myself entirely to these steps. So I wrote an 8-step list out, and there's a prayer for that too. God, please help me clear away the debris of self-will and self-reliant living. That will be done for blank as well as for me. And I had every single person, principal, institution, animal that I had harmed on this list. And I took the time to take a note card out, write down the harm, create a vision of how I'd like to correct it, understanding that it may not go that way. It's up to the person or individual or entity that I speak with, but just having a vision. The purpose of that exercise though was to have forgiveness for them and forgiveness for myself and prepare myself to go out and do his bidding and make these wrongs right. I definitely know now that the 9th step is definitely about freeing me up, but I really try to instill into my sponsees and folks that I communicate with that it's really about freeing the other person up. And it's just so important for me to put others in front of myself because I am innately self-centered. And here's another story I tell all the time. I prayed once when this girl dumped me. I prayed to God every day for 2 weeks that the girl would take me back. I was so heartbroken. I couldn't believe she dumped me. When the truth is, after the dust settled, I realized day one I shouldn't have been with the girl. But that was the only time I prayed for somebody. I mean, the only time I prayed for myself in sobriety. After that, from there on, I prayed for you that you were healthy. If I didn't have a job, I prayed that you got a job. If I didn't have money, I prayed that you had money. If I do have money, I pray that you have more than me. I want to stay out of self because it's something that will kill me. You know, it says very clearly in the book, resentment is the number one offender. It kills it kills alcoholics more than anything else, including alcohol. And self-centeredness is the root of our troubles. So anything I can do to be outside of self and anything I can do to be at peace and forgiving rather than resentful puts me in a good position to have a sober day and some longevity in AA. So 9 steps, 9th step. We got to that part, and there's a prayer for that too. God, please help me do the right thing, no matter what the personal consequences might be, because it's not about me. But I still have to consider: am I going to harm others? And I don't want to do that in the process of making amends. And that's why the 4 criteria we have on page 80 in the book, I think, is very helpful in giving us guidance before we go about that process. And we don't have much time left here, but I just tell you, I would be cautious of anyone that has told you they've made all their amends in AA. Be very cautious of that. Or at the very least, be cautious of me if I tell you that, because it's just not true. And I made so many amends in my 25 years. And when I went off to the races, I made so many amends. But there was amends I was holding on to. There was amends I was unwilling, even though I thought I was. And, there was a whole process. I want to tell you this story, though. This literally happened 2 weeks ago. I run my own business now. I sell tickets to events, concerts, whatever. On top of that, some sports memorabilia, yada, yada. And I went through a big stack of old, football, baseball, basketball, hockey cards that I had. which are worth some money. I figured it was time to let go of them, put some of that money towards some other things. And I'm literally going through this thing, negotiating in my head how I can get the most for each of these cards. And I realized I stole these cards when I was 11 years old. All of that inventory was stolen inventory. I had literally robbed those cards. So I did what any good member of AA that wants to practice a program would do. I asked God for help. I came up with an idea. I shared the idea with someone, and then I called. There's still a baseball card store there, believe it or not. I haven't gotten a call back yet. I've called 3 times at this point. My next journey is to go visit. It's not around the corner, so I have to plan a day for it and see if that store is connected to the original owners or the family, and I need to return those cards. And it was funny because I was rationalizing, even after all this stuff you just heard me say, even as grounded as I think I might be in well, this one, I mean, I stole it, but he wasn't going to sell it. Like, these are the kinds of thoughts that are going through my head. So I really need to constantly ask God for the power, but I'm committing to you and to myself, and I already have, but I'm recommitting that those cards are going to make their way back to that store in some capacity, or at the very least to some youngins and be put to some purpose other than my selfish need of putting some money in the bank. So I need to always be open is the point I'm saying. But I went out and I made the amends to mom, and it took years, but I stole from my dad, even though there's a 12-page list of what he did to me. That was one thing I did to him, and I needed to own that. And there's 1,000 other stories, but I don't have time to get into them. But it was important to make those amends and continue to be open. And the 10 step for me is a very simple formula. The first thing I need to know, and let me just say one more thing. We read the 9-step facts. I call them facts. Most of us call them promises, but they're the same things, facts, promises. We read that so many times in AA, we sometimes forget it. I encourage you to go back in peace, just with you and your higher power, to read those 9-step facts and really enunciate wherever it says the word will. These things will slip away, etc., and really understand the power of amends. I like telling current situation stories. A sponsee of mine who's also a good friend, he was in a tough situation at work, and he knew everything that was going to happen, and I'm going to be fired, and I'm not going to be able to collect unemployment. He's going to keep me free. He had this whole dialogue in his head about what was going to happen. And this is a man I respect, and he's a decent member of AA, but I still needed to remind him, let's take this to the principle of amends. Why don't you ask your boss for some time and make some amends? And that's what he did, and everything changed. His story was obviously not true, and I wouldn't say it's a happy ending, but it just grounds us and puts us in a different spot. But anyway, the number one thing I need to know for me, for the 10 step to be effective, and it asks us to grow in understanding effectiveness, is I need to make sure I'm doing the first 9. I can't just skip the steps and then decide I'm going to admit when I'm wrong. I mean, we say these things in AA all the time, like let go, just let go. I can't let go any more than I can just stop drinking. I let go when I make amends. There's no letting go for me until I take inventory and clean my side of the street. I don't just wake up and say, I'm going to let go today. I certainly ask God for the power to let go and etc. But I need to look at myself, and I need to go through that process of amends, which is sometimes direct, sometimes indirect, before I get that power to let go. So the 10 step to work effectively for me, I need to be doing the first 9. But the formula of the 10 step is so easy and so simple. And sometimes all of us, including myself, forget it. But immediately, when selfishness, self-seeking, dishonesty, or fear crops up, immediately, whether now, whether later, whether I'm on the phone, whether I'm at the DMV, whether I'm talking to my son, immediately when it crops up, I ask God to remove it. And then I immediately turn my thoughts to someone I can help. If there was some sort of harm I've created, I make amends promptly. And sometimes I need to talk with someone before I do, and sometimes I don't. The more I grow spiritually, the more I see how dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened I am. Obviously, I'm not robbing safes and doing stuff of that sort today, but I'm still just as dishonest today as I was then if I'm not grounded in these principles. And the 10 step allows me to grow in understanding and effectiveness. Because if I don't grow towards God, then I'm growing towards a drink. And that's the mantra I use all the time. You can use that acid test for any activity. Anything you do, run a stop sign, pick up the phone, give someone a hug, smoke a cigarette, whatever it is this activity going towards God or is it going towards a drink? And that's the mantra that really simplifies things for me and helps me understand where I'm at. Is this going towards God or a drink right now? The 11th step for me is really about prayer and meditation. It says in the 11th step to improve our prayer meditation, which tells me that we should already be praying and meditating long before the 11th step. But I really just simply like the instructions we have on page 86. Assuming I'm working in the first 9 steps, assuming I'm living in 10 throughout the day, at night I'm going to review my day. Was I selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, frightened? Do I owe an apology? What can I do better? The most important question of all time for me in AA, what am I keeping to myself, which should be discussed with another person at once? And I acknowledge all those things and I write them on a note card and I ask God for forgiveness and I ask him to give me the strength and courage to make corrective measures. And then I wake up the next day and ask God to divorce my thinking from dishonesty, self-seeking, and self-pity motives. And then I ask God for the power to do all these things I just found out on the note card the night before. That's my life. That's my steps. That's how I engage. And man, my life is filled today. And carrying the message, like Dr. Bob said, you carry the message and sometimes use words. Obviously, over this past hour, I need to use words in this particular medium, but we do a lot more with our actions. And I've had the opportunity to 12-step. Many folks, including those in my family, have had the opportunity to sponsor and be sponsored and be active in my home group and serve in the A general service structure and work at the general service office and serve as a delegate and be involved in districts and travel to different parts of Alcoholics Anonymous. I have a really, I feel so honored. There's a president of a board of a particular country that asked to spend some time with me today because that particular country is creating districts in their general service structure for the first time ever. I feel real honored to be asked to do that. And I would imagine I'm being asked to do that based on things they have seen. And that's what we get in Alcoholics Anonymous. And when we put just a little, we always get so much back. But for me, with all of that comes responsibility and humility. Like it's so important. Rotation is important, not needing to be number one and the best and the most important all the time, because that's bad for me. It's bad for you too, but it's also bad for me. I know we're about to wrap up here. I wish I got to talk a little bit more about general service and traditions and concepts, which is a huge part of my sobriety and long time in AA. But essentially, I'll just end with those chapters after working with others are so important. They really show me how to work within the community and work within the family and constantly reminding me to invite the family into my spiritual solution to see if I can connect with them. And I've been able to do that. My whole family is involved in 12 steps. They're in different 12-step programs, but it's something we can share in and help each other with. And listen, I still need a ton of help, guys. I still need these steps every day. I still have a 5th step like you do. I have 10-step inventory like you do. I need Alcoholics Anonymous and I need to work it often. And so I thank you for the opportunity, Glenn, and the group to share for a little.